And we are back to What Did AI Say? At VickyL-4AI on YouTube. Thank you so very much for coming back to the podcast. Gratitude is the attitude. Let's go ahead and jump right into today's question. And we're going to start with Chatgpt's answer. Here we go. How did indigenous matriarchy systems function and why were they dismantled? Okay, if you didn't get an opportunity to check the last episode, please do so. Episode number 100. This is episode number 101. In episode number 100, we specifically asked the question about patriarchy and discovered that of course, it's not a natural system, and of course, it wasn't the first system. Even though both ChatGPT and Deepseek told us that patriarchy did not start out as a deliberate means of getting rid of older, better, more equal systems, it did state that once it got its claws in, it was used to get rid of the older, more equal systems. And that it was also, patriarchy was also a great system for rulers to be able to tax their citizens and also to have property passed down from father to son. And because that was a big thing and a necessity, it also brought about the great concern for women's reproduction and who they reproduce with and whose son was whose. So all of this ties in, not to mention patriarchy was brought in on the back of colonialism and was solidified by organized religion at the time. So what we're going to do now is, because we know that patriarchy wasn't first, we're going to go ahead and do deep dives into the systems and the practices that were first. And so this one, we're going to start with the matriarchy. So just in case you forgot the question, let me reread it again. How did indigenous matriarchy systems function and why were they dismantled? Okay, ChatGPT's answer. Many indigenous societies around the world, including in parts of the Americas, Africa, Asia, and Oceania, were not matriarchies in the modern sense of women ruling over men. That's not what matriarchy meant. Most were better described as matrilineal. Descent and inheritance passed through the mother's line. Matrilocal, husbands moved into the wife's community after marriage. Women-centered governance systems. Women held major authority in land stewardship, kinship, diplomacy, food systems, and leadership selection. These systems varied enormously between nations and cultures. How indigenous matrilineal systems functioned. Examples include the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, many Anishinaabe nations, communities, the Cherokee Nation historically, and Navajo Nation, Dene, and numerous others. Excuse me if I butchered those names. Common features included clan identity through mothers. Children belonged to mother's clan, not the father's. Property, social roles, and lineage often flowed through women. For example, among the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, clan mothers held substantial authority. Chiefs could be selected and removed by senior women. Women control agricultural, lands, and food distribution in many communities, collective rather than individual ownership. Repeat that, collective rather than individual ownership. Land was often held collectively by clans or communities rather than as private property. Women frequently managed agricultural production, food storage, household allocation, and kinship networks. This created economic influence that translated into political influence. Complementary gender roles. Many indigenous societies viewed gender roles as reciprocal rather than hierarchical. Men and women often had distinct responsibilities, but one was not necessarily considered superior. Let's reread that. Many indigenous societies viewed gender roles as reciprocal rather than hierarchical. Men and women often had distinct responsibilities, but one was not necessarily considered superior. Some cultures also recognize more than two gender identities, now often grouped under the modern umbrella term Two Spirit. Consensus governance. Leadership was frequently based on persuasion, kinship obligations, reputation, and consensus, rather than centralized coercive power. Women in many nations had authority over diplomacy, adoption into clans, war decisions, or peace negotiations. Why these systems were dismantled. Oh, we get into the good stuff now. Get into the meat of the question. The dismantling happened through overlapping forces: colonization, Christianity, capitalism, land seizure, and state building. Let's repeat that. Why these systems were dismantled. The dismantling happened through overlapping forces: colonization, Christianity, capitalism, land seizure, and state building. European patriarchal norms. European colonizers arrived from societies heavily shaped by male property ownership, monarchy, church patriarchy, and legal systems that subordinated women. Let's reread that. European colonizers arrived from societies heavily shaped by male property ownership, monarchy, church patriarchy, and legal systems that subordinated women. Many colonizers misunderstood indigenous systems or viewed women's authority as illegitimate, or didn't bother to attempt to understand the system at all. Colonial officials often refused to negotiate with women leaders, even where women traditionally held political power. Christian missionary campaigns. Missionaries frequently targeted indigenous gender systems directly. They promoted male headed nuclear families, male land ownership, patriarchal marriage structures, and suppression of traditional spiritual roles held by women. In many boarding residential school systems, children were separated from matrilineal kin structures and taught European gender norms. So understand that not only was the belief system taken away, but so was the history and the history of the clans, the history of the villages, all of that was taken away. And what was forced upon us? Patriarchy and Christianity, neither of which are natural, or neither of which we actually believed in initially. Understand that. Examples include the systems imposed in United States, Canada, Australia, and elsewhere. Land privatization and capitalism. Colonial governments often transformed communal land systems into private property systems controlled by male heads of household. This undermined women's traditional economic authority. For example, U.S. allotment policies like the Dawes Act divided communal indigenous land into individual parcels. Colonial legal systems often recognized men as the formal owners. Imposed colonial governments. Colonial administrations frequently replaced consensus systems with male dominated councils modeled on European governance. In some nations, traditional women leaders lost legal standing, hereditary systems were weakened, and colonial governments recognized only male representatives. Violence and demographic collapse. War, forced removal, disease, and enslavement devastated many indigenous communities. Social systems became destabilized under survival pressures and colonial control. Important nuance, and I believe that this may be, oh, no, it's not. Okay. Important nuance. Not all indigenous societies were multilineal or women centered. Some were patriarchal, some egalitarian, and many mixed different forms of authority. Let's read that again. Not all indigenous societies were matrilineal or women centered. Some were patriarchal, some egalitarian, and many mixed different forms of authority. Also, matriarchy can be misleading because it suggests a mirror image of patriarchy, women dominating men, which generally does not accurately describe most indigenous governance systems. So make sure that you pay special attention to that. Matriarchy is not the exact opposite of patriarchy. That's not how it was done at all. So don't be fooled by that. Many scholars instead use terms like multilineal, matricentric, kinship based, or gender complementary societies. Continuing influence today. Many indigenous nations still preserve or revitalize these traditions. For example, clan mothers remain important within parts of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Matrilineal inheritance continues in some Navajo Nation communities. Indigenous feminist movements increasingly connect land sovereignty with restoration of traditional gender systems. Scholars such as, okay, this is ChatGPT's final thought. Scholars such as Paula Gunn Allen, Leanne Beta Samoksky Simpson, and Kim Anderson have written extensively on these topics. So, ChatGPT is giving you some authors who have written extensively about this particular subject if you want to do a deeper dive. Okay, so that, of course, was extremely interesting and insightful. And it continues with, what we're learning about how patriarchy came into existence, how the indigenous were forced to participate in the system. And now we're going to go ahead and ask Deepseek the same question and find out what its answer was. So let me repeat the question again just in case you forgot it. How did indigenous matriarchy systems function and why were they dismantled? Okay, this is Deepseek's answer. Indigenous matriarchal systems, also known as gender egalitarian or biarchal societies, were not simple inversions of European patriarchies, but complex systems centered on balance, consensus, and the significant power of women. Okay, I'm going to read that again because that was a mouthful from Deepseek. Indigenous matriarchal systems, also known as gender egalitarian or biarchal societies, were not simple inverses of European patriarchies, but complex systems centered on balance, consensus, and the significant power of women. These systems ensured the well being of the community and were dismantled through the deliberate systemic imposition of colonial matriarchal norms. So these systems ensured the well being of the community and were dismantled through the deliberate systemic imposition of colonial patriarchal norms. That's good. Okay, how indigenous matriarchal systems function. These systems were rooted in balance, complementarity, and profound respect for women's roles. Political authority. Women actively selected, advised, and could remove male leaders. For instance, among the Haudenosaunee, clan mothers held the authority to nominate and depose chiefs, ensuring male leadership was accountable. Ooh, I have to reread that again. Even back then, there was an issue with the accountability of male leadership. Wow, imagine that. Let me reread that. Political authority. Women actively selected, advised, and could remove male leaders. For instance, among the Haudenosaunee, clan mothers held the authority to nominate and depose chiefs, ensuring male leadership was accountable. That's a bar. Economic power. The system was often matrilineal with wealth and property, including homes, tools, and children belonging to the women's lineage. Social structures. Descent and clan membership were traced through the mother, uniting people across villages or nations through a complex web of kinship. Clan mothers and matriarchs. Elder women known as clan mothers held immense moral authority, overseeing governance, mediating disputes, and preserving cultural knowledge. How colonialism systematically dismantled these systems. How colonialism systematically dismantled these systems. The transition was a calculated project of suppression involving intertwined strategies. Let me reread that. The transition was a calculated project of suppression involving intertwined strategies. Imposing European laws. Colonial governments replaced customary law with systems designed to autonomize communities. Imposing European laws. Colonial governments replaced customary law with systems designed to atomize communities. Atomize. Atomize. The Indian Act, this was in Canada, imposed male-dominated elected councils over traditional consensus-based governance. So the Indian Act that was passed in Canada imposed male-dominated elected councils over traditional consensus-based governance. Okay. The Dawes Act, the Dawes Allotment Act in the U.S. in 1887 broke up communal lands into individual plots assigned to male heads of household, directly transferring economic power from women to men. Okay, so I can completely understand the statement that Deepseek is making about the transition being calculated and involving intertwined strategies. So different territories were imposing laws that were actually tearing up these older systems in these Indian communities. The Civilization Campaign. The U.S. Civilization Campaign aimed to transform indigenous societies into patriarchal nuclear families, targeting women's roles as central to this change. Residential and missionary schools. This is breaking my heart here. Indigenous children were forcibly removed to schools where they were forbidden to speak their languages, beaten for practicing traditions, and taught that their cultures were inferior to Christian patriarchal values. I'm going to read that again. Residential and missionary schools. Indigenous children were forcibly removed to schools where they were forbidden to speak their languages, beaten for practicing traditions, and taught that their cultures were inferior to Christian patriarchal values. You got to know that. That's our history. Economic disruption and land theft. Forced relocation dismantled the matrilineal clan structures of tribes like the Muskogee Creek Nation, while loss of hunting grounds undermined indigenous economies and women's authority to resource distribution. Violence as a tool of erasure. Colonial violence physically and psychologically targeted the central role of women. This included widespread, often non-consensual sterilization programs aimed at Native American women as late as the 1960s and 70s. Okay, we're going to hit a Deepseek summary here. If you're interested in a specific tribe or nation, feel free to ask. I can provide more detailed information. So if you want to do a deeper dive, it's available. Just ask your question. Okay, how does any of this affect our daily lives? Right now, I believe that we, American citizens, are going through a reckoning that includes truth and the desperate need for accountability. A part of that reckoning is the truth, and knowing what actually happened in our history is necessary, I believe, to correcting systems that have been disproportionately against minorities, especially Black people, and making our country great for the first time for everyone. So without truth, we don't know what actually happened in the past. We don't know that Christianity was forced upon all of us. It is not our natural belief system. That patriarchy was forced upon all of us. It was not natural. It was a means of being able to track and tax families through the father. So this is important, detailed information that we need to know moving forward so that we don't continue to repeat the cycle that we're currently in. Two-party political system, crap. It has never worked, and it's not there to work for us. It's there to mislead us and keep us enslaved. Christianity, not our natural belief system. It is not. And I never criticize people's belief systems because I believe that people need to believe, many people need to believe in something. And so it is your right to do so. But forcing a belief system or trying to force a belief system on others through beating them, through taking away their natural belief system, no, sir, that is not right at all. It was done to us. We cannot continue it. We can't take on the characteristics of these racist white people and forget that it's not ours. We're not them. We don't behave as they do. And we need to remember that. Okay, let's move on to our positive saying for today, which again, I did not pick out one. So let me see if I can find one. Okay, this is another Malcolm X saying, and I think it's a good one. I don't think I've used it before, but it's possible I may have. But it's still a good one that should be repeated as often as possible. A people taught to hate themselves will never stand up for themselves. A people taught to hate themselves will never stand up for themselves. That's Malcolm X. Thank you so very much for giving me about 25 minutes of your time. Like and subscribe. We the people have the power. See you next episode. Peace.